Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone Season 5 Episode 21. It's called Spur of the Moment. So spoilers for the episode. This one's about a young woman who's 18 years old, who is from like a rich family. They've got a big countryside estate. And she goes horse riding one morning and is terrified when another woman who's all dressed in black starts screaming at her and chasing her, also on horseback, like through the countryside. And she eventually makes it back to her house and tells her parents or her fiance of how scared she is, how this woman's completely rattled her. And I think the thing for me is that it's very, very obvious to the audience that this is just herself, right? The woman dressed in black is just herself, maybe with a little bit of makeup to make her look older. Because that's ultimately what this is. This is the idea that this is a future version of herself who somehow is trying to warn her younger self not to make a mistake, particularly as to who to marry. Because as we learn throughout the episode, she's engaged to this kind of rich boy that her father really likes. They're going to have an engagement party that night for it. But there's another guy named David? Yeah, that sounds right. Who shows up and is determined to see her, to sort of like give her another chance to admit that she's still in love with him, because he's trying to win her over. He thinks she's only marrying this other guy because the dad wants her to, and he's trying to like convince her to like ditch him and come with him instead. So you've got these two guys who are vying for her affection, and you've got the dad who seems to be very interested and really doesn't like this other guy that shows up. He pulls out a gun, he threatens him with the police. He wants rid of him as much as he can. And that's, by and large, the first half of the episode is setting all that up. And then just before the ad break, we cut to, well, I say we cut to, we do the dreamlike waviness to the future, where we see the older version of Anne, our main character, dressed in black, arriving back at the house. And, you know, then it goes to the ad break, we come back, and we get that side of it, which is her, now that she's an alcoholic, she regrets marrying who she did. She talks to her mother about the death of her father, about how she doesn't care that they're going to lose the house. You know, it's a dark timeline. Everything's going wrong. And she regrets who she married, right? And I think one of the biggest critiques I'd have of this episode is how much of it has to spill out to the audience. Because when she's talking to her mother in this back half chunk of the show, she sits and says, "Oh, I saw myself. And I realized it was me all those years ago that I saw. And I was trying to convince myself not to marry the wrong man." She really spells it all out. Like, she goes through every possible thing that you could be thinking about as for what's going on in this episode and just explains it all to the audience. The only thing that's surprising that really happens, the only real twist that kind of comes into it, is that it swerves you into the wrong man. Basically, you think that the rich guy that the dad wanted is the one she's mistakenly going to marry, but the reveal here is that it's actually the other guy, David, who was the more romantic one, who walks out, and he's the one she married. She did turn her back on the guy that her dad picked and went with him instead, but seemingly he's helped run the estate into the ground. He's like, "Oh, I'm the man of the house, you have to show me respect," and all that, and she's drunk and very unhappy. Like, that little swerve is really the only thing the episode has, I would say, of real kind of like narrative interest. Everything else is so spelled out that it's really hard to really be that invested in it, or really. I almost wonder if it was a mistake that they clearly showed the face of the older version of Anne in the start of the episode, because it was really kind of frustrating, honestly, that regular Anne, 18-year-old Anne, never once said she looked like me. She never acknowledges it. She just says, "Oh, this crazy woman was coming after me." And I'm like, she looks like you. She looks exactly like you. Maybe a little older because they're using makeup to make her look older, but it's hard to suspend your disbelief when the character herself cannot acknowledge that she looked like me. And it's going to take her until she's at that age later in life before she even considers, "Oh, that was me this whole time." So I didn't really find all of that stuff that compelling, because it was quite clear what the point of the episode was right from the very start. And all that was really left was to sort of learn who the characters were and what their actual drama was, like what the family dispute is and what's going on in that side of things. And that ultimately is not that interesting. And the second half of the episode, after we get our first big scene in the future, where she's doing all this stuff, where she's talking about all of her regrets. We do cut back to the past, and we see that night where the engagement party's happening, and she's waiting outside the house, and her fiance comes out and talks to her, and she's very cold and distant. And the one interesting line of dialogue she has is that the fiance says, "Oh, your dad's in a really good mood," and she says, "Oh, he's always in a good mood when he gets his way," and then says, "Oh, don't forget I said that. It's not important." But obviously, that's telling the audience maybe part of her motivation here is that, combined with the fact that she talked in the future about how her dad was like coddling her and controlling her entire life, you know, she was his baby even when she was an adult, and he had a big say in what she was doing with her life. This moment sort of like hints that, oh no, part of her main motivation for like ditching this fiance and going with the other guy was because it's not what her dad wants, right? That's part of it. Maybe she does really care about him too, but that's part of the motivation here. She's, at the very least, she feels that she's been manipulated into marrying the guy that her dad wants. And that's not to say that this is a binary choice. Like, I don't think the fact that the guy she goes with, David, ends up being the wrong one and ends up being this miserable life means that the fiance she did have that her dad picked was the right choice for her. I think he probably still is also the wrong choice. She still would have been unhappy most likely with him. But it's presented as a binary thing, and she picks David instead, and then it goes down the path that it does. And what we get is you know, a dramatic scene between her and her mum in the future about all of her regrets, and the mum slaps her and she slaps her back, which arguably should feel quite dark, but I don't know if it ever quite does. And then you've got like David with his kind of fake stubble, which also stuck out to me a little bit. So some of the elements feel a little bit hokey. And then even on top of all of this and how kind of like obvious what the episode is doing is early on, only for it to be explained to us in detail by the characters as if we might not get it. It then repeats the start of the episode at the end, where it shows that she goes back out on the horse in the future in her black outfit, and she waits at the top of the hill. She sees her younger self at the bottom and screams. And then Rod narrates, obviously, as he always does at the start and the end, but it felt like he was almost filling for time because the story wasn't quite long enough to hit the runtime they needed. So his little build up to eventually saying "in the Twilight Zone" felt like it had an extra few steps to it, which made it just sound convoluted. Because he talks about, oh, this is going to be failed in a cabinet. And he doesn't just say failed in a cabinet in the Twilight Zone. He's like, failed in a cabinet in the records office of the Twilight Zone. There was like an extra couple of steps to just make it sound a bit fancier. And it really felt like it was kind of trying to just cover up that this wasn't that interesting an episode, and that there really wasn't quite a... Obviously, the core idea of the episode is quite simple, and there's nothing wrong with it. The idea of regret, the idea of making these choices that you later, you know, and you almost then start to feel haunted by your younger self. And then the Twilight Zone element is that the younger self can actually see the older version being angry, and that adding into kind of the worry and the picking of what's to come and all that. But in a strange way, I think the message, because she couldn't really have anticipated that this guy who's supposed to be the love of her life ended up being such a shitbag. I guess the only real message is that she made this decision for the wrong reason. This was more about rebelling against her father, and that is obviously, that's led her down this path that she's very unhappy with. And I mean, that's fine as a message. I wouldn't say that... I don't know if the timey-wimey element of this is really adding all that much to the story, right? Obviously, yeah, there's the idea of regret, but I wouldn't say that the older version chasing after the younger version of Anne really impacts what she does in the story in any way, and maybe that's the point, I guess. But it feels like to make that element more fun, you could have kind of like a, you know, a cyclical element where perhaps like being scared by the older versions what convinces her to make the wrong choice in the first place, and it's kind of this snake eating its own tail thing or something that would maybe add to the reasons why we're even doing this supernatural time travel element to the story in the first place. But of course, if you don't have that, then it's not even really a Twilight Zone episode. It's just an episode with a scene set in 1939 and then a scene set in the present day, and being like, oh, I regret all these choices I've made. I made them for the wrong reasons because I was upset at Daddy. I don't know. wasn't that compelling. I think it's one of the weaker episodes of the season, certainly. I also think that the cliffhanger to go to the ad break also felt a little muddled, because it was really just, oh, we're back to the version in the black outfit, we're back to what appears to be the future, and we're following her. But it doesn't go to the ad break as soon as we make that transition. We sort of see her like arrive home and look around a little bit first. It's kind of downbeat as a cliffhanger for the ad break goes. So it just kind of felt like, oh, there's not much momentum. And that's not to say that you have to have a big cliffhanger for the ad break. I'm not saying that without that the story's not compelling, but I think in some cases it's indicative of the lack of the driving force, because if you don't have like a good moment to like go to the ad break on that feels like we're propelling into the next part of the story that's going to really shake it up, it just kind of felt like, oh no, it's time for the ad break, so we'll come back and we'll continue from here. I think that general sentiment as well was feeling about the story in general, so it just kind of like enhanced that feeling a little bit, I guess. It just amplified it. So yeah, not a great episode. I think it's one of the weakest ones of the season so far. It wasn't painful or anything. There's definitely been more painful episodes of Twilight Zone, but I don't know if the character herself is that compelling. Her choice is not that interesting. Her family are not that interesting. And the actual time travel Twilight Zone element is ultimately just kind of feels like a bit of a nothing burger for me in this one. I mean, I get the overall ideas about regret and looking back on your past mistakes and all that, but I don't know really what it does with that beyond just saying that people have regret. Yeah, sadly, that's all I'm feeling for this Twilight Zone. Interestingly, when Rod Serling showed up at the end, he kind of spoke about how they're bringing in like a guest director and how it's someone who won awards at Cannes Film Festival and all that. He seemed quite enthusiastic about it, but he basically said nothing about what the episode actually is. He mentioned that the title's an occurrence at a Wolf Creek Bridge, but he never really talked about what the episode was, just that they're bringing in someone fancy. So it's Robert Enrico is the director, who has done a bunch of stuff. I don't actually know him. I assumed I was going to know who the director was when he said that he'd won awards and stuff like that. I can't say I do know him off the top of my head. He's not someone that I've crossed paths with. But regardless, he's directing this next episode. The description on IMDb is, during the American Civil War in 1862, not 1962, that would be a very, very weird year for that. 1862, a condemned Confederate prisoner, Peyton Bakuhar, is due to be hanged by Union troops. Okay, it doesn't really tell us a whole lot, other than just kind of the setting. So I don't know what to think necessarily, but we'll see how it is. Rod seemed quite excited to promote the filmmaking aspect. They even had him sitting next to a camera and some microphones to really get across, we're talking about filmmaking now. We're bringing in a big filmmaker to do this next episode. So, yeah, we'll see. But let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Get me on the Twitters at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. And of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/mailfuzztv and help keep all the content coming. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.